Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to do the quarter year check-in tag. Now, I have previously done the quarter year crisis book tag, which is created by Roisin's Reading, but the day after I posted my version of that, Shelley Swearingen posted her own new quarter year tag. And I'm doing them pretty much one right after the other because I really like the questions that are included in this tag, and Shelley did tag me. There are quite a few questions to get stuck into with this tag, so without much further ado, I'm just going to jump straight into the questions. The first section of this tag is all about Booktubers, and the first question for that is, which bookish creator has influenced your reading the most this year? I've generally always said that I'm not really that influenced when it comes to my reading. I just read things as and when they appeal to me. I did earlier in the year do a video where I talked about my top picks from various different Booktubers best books of the year videos, and actually I've only read one of the books that was recommended there, which I will talk about a little bit more later. I was initially going to say nobody for this video, but actually that is not strictly true, and I have come to the conclusion that the bookish creator who has influenced my reading the most this year is actually Victoria over at What Victoria Read, because we've actually had a little bit of crossover with our reading. Either she has read a book and it's prompted me to want to go pick it up, or she's put it on a TBR and I've thought, oh yes, I wanted to get around to that, or just coincidentally we have ended up reading the same book around the same time. I ended up rereading The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by B. Schwab after seeing it was one of the books that she'd read. We both read Sunrise on the Reaping around the same time, as well as The Strawberry Patch Pancake House by Laurie Gilmore. Also Mary the First Queen of Sorrows. I had planned to read that in March and I saw that that was on her February TBR. I think she ended up finishing it in March. And I'm also pretty sure she's read Dissolution by CJ Sansom, which is a book that I read this year. So yes, the booktuber I've probably had the most crossover with is definitely Victoria. Question number 2, have you noticed any interesting shifts or trends within the bookish content world? I'm not so sure. I feel like things are just ticking over the way that they normally do. And this is my general contention with Booktube, is that we tend to have a lot of the same conversations over and over again. They just get repackaged in different ways. Whether that is talking about book snobbery, whether it is talking about whether or not Booktube and BookTok are ruining our reading. A lot of those conversations are coming up, but they aren't conversations that I haven't seen expressed in years past, so I'm not quite sure. As with other years, I've seen loads of people getting really hyped around book prizes, myself included, only to be pretty disappointed when the shortlists come out and none of our favourite books have made it, or at least not the ones that we expected to. So to me, it is just the normal fluctuations, chopping and changing that goes on in any given year. Is there a type of bookish content you wish creators, including yourself, explored more? I'm not really sure about this one because I subscribe to a lot of different people who all do different types of videos. You know, you'll get some pockets of Booktube who do the typical like TBR whole wrap-up format, but then there are other parts of Booktube who do more individual book reviews, some who do more reading vlog style. So I don't know, I feel like I'm pretty well served in the different kinds of formats. Next question is, what is a book recommendation you took from a creator that completely paid off? As I say, I've only really directly taken one book recommendation this year, and that was Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon, which was recommended by Ben Reedsgood as well as Miranda over at Pages and Stages, and that was a pretty solid book for me, so I'd say that's paid off. If you could collaborate with any bookish creator for a unique project, who would it be and what would you do? I don't know, I feel like myself and Claire Fenby are well overdue having some sort of collaboration, purely because Claire is the creator that I probably share the most similarities with in terms of our interest, in terms of our reading taste, particularly in our love of Tudor history in Jane Austen. However, we have talked about the fact that there are little things, these little pockets here and there that are completely different. So Claire has been getting more into mysteries and that's not really something I'm interested in. I'm really into Greek myth retelling and that's not something that she's really ever ventured into. Claire tends to visit a lot more heritage sites, and while that is something that I would love to do, it's something that I just don't make a lot of time for, but I probably use that time on musical theatre. But yeah, there is a lot of crossover. Typically we tend to be showing, especially our history and historical fiction books tend to have a lot of crossover. If Claire recommends a book in that vein, I'm probably going to pick it up next. So yeah, it would just be nice to have like an on-screen chat with her. And then the final question for this section is, has your relationship with the bookish community changed in any way this year? I personally feel a lot more engaged this year than I have in years past, and I think that's because I'm making more of a conscious effort to do so. Something I'm really enjoying doing is my monthly Booktube rewind videos, where I just spotlight different video trends that I'm noticing, different tags that have cropped up in the past month, as well as just favourite videos and creators. That's just made me feel a lot more engaged, at least, and I hope that people do enjoy those videos. books. The next section of questions is trends and patterns in your reading. The first question being, are you reading more or less than you expected? And I would say probably more in numbers, but less in terms of my personal enjoyment overall. I've definitely read fewer books that I've absolutely loved as opposed to last year. I've currently read 39 books and I'm very pleased with that number, but I don't know what is happening where I'm just finding a lot more books to be a little bit meh. And I don't think that's down to me like speed reading through things. I've read at this pace before and been absolutely fine, but it's just the books I'm picking up I'm not quite enjoying as much as I would like to be. Question number 2 for this section is, are you reading more backlist or new releases? And I would say it's probably around about a third front list, so books that have come out in the past 12 months or so, to about 2/3 backlist. Have you been reading books you already own, or are you still picking up library or borrowed books? And I would say there's just generally a good mix of things that I owned already, things that are recent buys, and then I am increasing a lot more the books that I pick up at the library. Next question is, what is the longest and shortest book that you've read so far? The longest is definitely Mary the First Queen of Sorrows by Alison Weir. That one was a little over 500 pages, I want to say. And then the shortest were actually 2 books, which were both children's picture books, The Grand Hotel of Feelings and then King Winter's Birthday. Both of those came in at 32 pages each. Next question is, have you read anything completely outside of your comfort zone? And for those, it's probably Ultra Processed People by Chris Van Tullochen, as well as Food for Life by Tim Spector. I haven't read a whole lot of like nutrition, food, non-fiction, but I have dipped my toes into these 2 books this year. Been interesting to read these, become more informed about food and nutrition, but also to kind of like cherry pick, take the things I think are actually going to be useful for me and discard what is not realistic for my life. Have you noticed any patterns in the kinds of books you're drawn to this year? Not particularly. As I talk about in the next question, I am a mood reader, so I'm just really going with the flow. The last question for this section is, have you been more intentional with your reading, or has it felt more like following whims and impulses? As I say, I am very much a mood reader, so I plan to follow my whims and impulses. And what I generally find is that where I do try to be more intentional, where I do try to kind of force something and have a very strict TBR, it just does not work. My enjoyment of the reading just goes right down. The next section is reading goals and challenges. First question being, are you on track with any reading goals or challenges you set at the beginning of the year? So I set my reading goal for 100 books this year, and as I say, I have currently read 39, so I'm definitely well on track there. I didn't really set any page goals, and I don't believe I set any very specific reading goals. I think a lot of the goals I set at the beginning of the year were more booktube related, though actually generally my goal is always to keep my TBR down. And I will say between Christmas and birthday, I've had the natural increase in my TBR from it being more towards like 2 or 3 books at any given time, to now I think I've got about 11 or 12 books on my TBR. So that's definitely something that I want to whittle back down, but it's not gone completely out of control, so I'm not too worried about that. Question number 2 for this section, have you abandoned or changed any goals? Nope, I am just trucking on. And then the final question for this section is, are there any books you still really want to get to before the end of the year? And I mean, with 8 or 9 months left, I think I've got plenty of time. So just generally anything that is on my current TBR, I would like to read them. The next book that I am pretty sure I want to pick up is The Pretender by Jo Harkin, which is a new release. In fact, at the time that I'm filming this still hasn't come out, but I found a copy of it during Oxford Literary Festival, so I had to snatch it up. And this is historical fiction looking at the life of Lambert Simnel, one of the pretenders to the throne of Henry VII, so I am very, very keen to get round to this. And then the final section of this book tag is the personal reading reflection. The first question being, what is the most disappointing book that you've read? At this point in the year, I was pretty disappointed with Disillusion by CJ Sansom. It wasn't the worst book that I read so far this year, but I was expecting amazing things. I've heard so much buzz and praise for this book, and it just didn't really do anything for me. I found it quite dull. Which book surprised you the most in a good or a bad way? I said before in the quarter year crisis book tag that Ultra Processed People by Chris Van Tullochen quite surprised me. I got quite into that. I've been really interested to see how I have changed like the kinds of food that I pick up as a result of it. I think I'm being a lot more mindful, and I think I just wasn't expecting how thoughtful and considerate it was. I thought it was going to be a lot more doom and gloom. I thought it was going to be a lot more like shaming people for their food choices, and it's very much not that. It is much more about industries and governments and holding them to account rather than individually picking on everyday people and being like, you're not eating right. Have you discovered any new favourite authors? Not so much new favourite authors for this, I'm afraid. I've definitely read multiple books from the same author, but either I'd already read them before or I discovered that I actually didn't like that author. So for me, repeat authors this year have been Suzanne Collins, because I read read Sunrise on the Reaping, and then I went back and reread, or re-listened to I should say, the original trilogy of the Hunger Games. So I already knew that I liked those books. I've read a couple of Tessa Dare books this year, but I already knew that I liked her. I read The Wood at Midwinter by Susanna Clarke, and then I ended up reading and DNFing Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I've ultimately come to the decision that I'm not really a big fan of Susanna Clarke. So yeah, so far this year, no new favourite authors, I'm afraid. But I do hope for more in the next 8 to 9 months. Next question is, have you DNF'd any books, and if so, why? So most recently I ended up DNFing Bad Publicity by Bianca Gillam. This was a romance book, which I was quite anticipating because it was about a book publicist. And if you don't know, I am a book publicist. And the mess that arises when one of the authors at her new job ends up being one of her exes, and she has to take him on a European book tour. I was very intrigued by this premise, and I'm going to talk about this more in my April wrap up, but this really didn't work for me. I found it very, very frustrating. I got 198 pages into it and I thought, life is too short. I am just hate reading it at this point, so I did put it down. I also DNF'd What She Ate by Laura Shapiro. What could have been a really interesting non-fiction about various historic women and the food that they ate, and I just found it, once again, quite dull. And then, as I say, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I cannot fault this book for the atmosphere that it evokes and the writing, but I just found myself not connecting to any of the characters, and when you are like 350 pages into a 700-800 page book, you feel like you should be enjoying the characters a little bit more and having some sort of connection to them, even if that connection is that you hate them. And I just wasn't feeling it for that book. What's the book that has resonated with you the most this year, and why? It's a toss-up of the book that I'm going to mention at the end, which was my best book of the year so far, and probably Ultra Processed People. As I've said previously, I didn't think it was like the best reading experience, but I've definitely taken the most information out of it. I've listened to a lot of podcasts that Chris Van Tolkien has gone on. I've learnt up a lot more about ultra processed food. And so, you know, when I'm in a supermarket, when I'm making choices of what to eat, I do think about it. And rather than it meaning that I never eat ultra processed food, it just means that I am choosing to eat those foods, feeling better informed. And I think it is just really important to be informed. You know, eating is something that we do 3, 4, 5 times a day, and yet the state of our nutrition information is very, very poor. So as much information that we can get that is scientifically backed and coming from non-biased sources, it is incredibly hard to pass out, but incredibly important. The penultimate question for this tag is, what book challenged your perspective or made you think differently about something? Once again, Ultra Processed People for the same reasons. And then finally, what is the best book that you've read so far this year? Probably pretty predictably, so far it has been Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, which is the latest prequel in the Hunger Games series. Looking at Hamish Abernathy's games, it's the best book because it got me the most emotionally invested. It's one of the best entries in the series. It builds on a lot of what we already originally know from the trilogy and expands upon it in a way that is not retconning the original series and being like, no, this always existed in this story, and you just know that that was not true. Everything that was added with this story felt like it must have always been that way, but we as the reader are just finding about it now, which is the way that it should be. And you know, there's the fact that it made me cry. I think that might be the only book to do that so far this year. So there we go, those are all of my answers to the quarter year check-in tag, which is more of a reflective book tag. Thank you very much to Shelley for creating this tag and for tagging me. I will leave down in the description box the people I'm tagging, though I know that Shelley tagged quite a lot of people. So if you are tagged twice, my apologies. Do let me know your answers to any of the questions down below. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.